Hello, welcome to Pragim Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 44 of SQL Server. In this session, we'll learn about after triggers, after update triggers specifically. In part 42 of this video series, we have spoken about after insert and after delete triggers. Again, in part 42, we have spoken about the three types of triggers that are available in SQL Server: DML, DDL, and logon triggers. DML triggers are fired automatically in response to DML events, and examples of DML events include insert, update, and delete statements. DML triggers can again be classified into two types: after triggers and instead of triggers. After triggers are also called as for triggers. And in part 42, we have spoken about after insert and after delete triggers. And we know that after triggers fires after the triggering action. The insert, update, and delete statements causes an after trigger to fire after the respective statement's complete execution. On the other hand, instead of triggers, as the name says, fires instead of the triggering action. Instead of the insert, update, and delete statements, the instead of trigger gets fired. Okay, and we have seen in part 42 of this video series, there are two special tables that triggers make use of: inserted and deleted tables. Inserted tables will hold the new data that you have inserted into that table, and deleted table will hold the data that you have actually deleted. Now let us see what actually happens when we update a row, and if there is an update trigger, what does these inserted and deleted tables contain. So let's first quickly create an update trigger on TBL employee table. So we have got this TBL employee table which has got ID, name, salary, gender, and department ID columns. Now let's go ahead and create an update trigger on this table, and then update a row and see what these inserted and deleted tables look like. So let's get into SQL Server Management Studio, and we have this tables, TBL employee, and let's write an update trigger for this. And again, the syntax for the update trigger is pretty much simple. Similar to insert and delete trigger, except that instead of for insert or for delete, you use for update. So create trigger, trigger name, and then give a meaningful name to the trigger. Usually triggers will have a tr prefix, so tr underscore the table on which we are creating this trigger, in this case TBL employee, and for what action, and we are creating this for an update action, so for update on TBL employee, for update as begin and end. Okay, so here let's simply say select star from the two special tables that triggers make use of: deleted, and the other one is inserted. So select star from inserted table, and let's look at what actually happens. So create this trigger, command completed successfully. If we refresh the triggers folder, we should see the trigger that we have just created. Alright, now let's go ahead and update the employee table. So if you look at the employee table, we have got an employee with ID 8 who is Jane here at the moment. Jane, his salary is 1800, and Jane is a female. But what we are doing here in the update statement is basically we are changing his name from Jane to James, and his salary from 1800 to 2000, and gender from female to male. Okay, so let's execute this and see what actually happens. And keep in mind, we have created an after update trigger. So obviously immediately after the execution of this update statement on this TBL employees table, this trigger gets fired automatically. Okay, and we know that triggers are actually special kinds of stored procedures that execute automatically in response to the DML events, because these are DML triggers. So let's execute this update statement, see what happens. So press F5. Look at this. This is the select star from deleted. So deleted table contains this data, and inserted table contains this data. So if you look at it, ID, we haven't changed the ID because that's the primary key, so it stays as it is. And then we have changed the name from Jane to James, and similarly salary from 1800 to 2000, female to male. And department ID we haven't changed, so it's the same. So from this you should have got an idea that deleted table will contain the data that the table has before the update action, and inserted table will contain the data, actually the new data after the update. Okay, so delete I mean after update trigger actually makes use of both inserted and deleted tables, and inserted tables contain the new data, deleted table contains the old data before the update action. Alright, now with this in mind, let's quickly write a trigger that can audit you know employee information when we update a specific employee data. Okay, now if you look at what we are trying to achieve, let's say for example yesterday when we have spoken about after insert and after delete triggers, we have audited these things. For example, when we add a new employee, we said new employee with ID is equal to 9 is added at so and so date and time. Similarly, if an employee is deleted, then we have audited that as well. Similarly, when we update an employee's details, we want to capture what information is updated. Okay, for example, if you look at this, employee with ID is equal to 2 changed name from Mike to Mikey and salary from 3,400 to 3,500. So these two fields are changed. Okay, if there is only one field changed, then we only want to capture that one field. Okay, so how many ever are the fields changed, we want to capture all those fields and then log that in this another table called TBL employee audit table. Okay, so let us see how to do that, and obviously we can make use of after update trigger for that. Okay, so we have this TBL employee and TBL employee audit table, so we want to insert audit information into this TBL employee audit table. And if you look at the TBL employee audit table, it has got one column of type, two columns basically. One is the primary key and the other one is nvarchar audit data. Okay, so obviously we will have to build the string and then insert it into this table. Okay, so if you look at the way inserted and deleted tables are storing the old and new data, it should be pretty straightforward to achieve. What we will basically do is retrieve the data from inserted table, compare that with the data in the deleted table, and if there are changes, build that string and then insert that string into TBL employee audit table. It's as simple as that. So obviously if you look at the employee table, it has got name, salary, gender and department ID columns. So we need variables to hold the old and new value. So first of all, we need to create the trigger. So let's create the trigger. I have this written already so that we don't waste time typing it. So create trigger, trigger name. Since we already have a trigger with this name, we will call, we'll say alter instead of create. Okay, on TBL employee for update as begin. So this is all the regular stuff. And look at this, we are creating some variables basically here, and the reason why we are creating these variables are to hold the old data and the new data. For example, ID will not change, that's a primary key, so I just have one variable to hold that ID of type integer. But then name, salary, gender and department ID can change, so I am having variables of that data type: old name, old salary, new salary, old gender, new gender, old department ID, new department ID. And then obviously we need to build a string like this: employee with ID is equal to 2, change name from whatever. So we need to build a string like this, and to do that we need a variable of type nvarchar. So I'm creating another variable called audit string of length 1000. Okay, and then I am using here a temporary table, and the reason for that is, let's say for example, I will actually practically explain that reason in a bit. Okay, so all we are doing here is, so this is a trigger, and we know that a trigger can access inserted and deleted table. So what we are doing here, after declaring all the variables that we need, we are saying, okay, select all the rows from the inserted table. So when will a row get into an inserted table? Whenever somebody updates a specific row, the new data will be in the inserted table. So what we are telling here is, whatever row that is there in inserted table, take that into the temp table. Okay, select star into hash temp table from inserted. Okay, so put that row into the temporary table, and then I'm using a loop here. And the reason why I'm doing this is because somebody can issue an update statement like this: update TBL employee, set name is equal to whatever, salary is equal to whatever, and then where ID in maybe 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4, they can give any number of IDs they want. So if they are updating so many records in a single shot, then we want to loop through each record because we want to update each employee. So that's why I'm putting this in this temporary table and then looping each row within that temporary table. Okay, so here we are checking, okay, select ID from hash temporary table. So we are getting the ID. I mean, if there is an ID column, I mean, if there are rows, select the ID column. If there are no rows, obviously this will not return anything, and this exists function will return false. If it returns false, obviously we'll get out of the loop. So this is basically a Boolean condition to check if there are rows in the temporary table. And then what we are doing here, we are initially setting the audit string to an empty string, and then from the temporary table, if there are rows, this condition will tell if there are rows in the temporary table. So if there are rows, it could be one, it could be many. Okay, so if there are many rows, we still only want the first row. That's why we are using top one. So select top one. What we are saying is select the ID into ID variable. Since this is an inserted table, we are copying into hash temp table. So hash temp table contains the new data. So I'm copying the name, new name to name, name to new name, gender to new gender variable, similarly salary and department ID from the temp table. And then what we are doing, we are taking this ID and then going to the deleted table, because deleted table contains the old data. So we are using the old variables, old name, old salary, old gender, populating them. Okay, so it's pretty simple. I mean, these two lines are, they look big, but they are pretty simple to understand. All you're doing is selecting the first row from inserted table, taking that ID and then comparing that with the ID in the deleted table, because if there are multiple rows, we want to pick up the right ID. So, and then we are populating those old variables. Next step, as you might have guessed, what we will do, we will compare the old and new names, old and new gender. Okay, but before that, we are setting the audit string. Okay, so how do we want the output? We want to say employee with ID is equal to 2 changed. So we want to first build this string, and to do that, we are setting the audit string to employee with ID is equal to whatever is the ID that we have here. And ID data type is integer, so we need to cast that. So ID is integer, we need to cast that to nvarchar. So we are casting that and then concatenating with this string. And then obviously to that we are concatenating this changed word. And then now starts the comparison. So from here, this is again a very simple code. It looks big, but then it's just a copy paste of the code. So here we are saying, okay, if old name is not equal to new name, it means it has changed. So we are concatenating the audit string. So to this audit string, add, obviously the old name is not equal to new name, so employee with ID is equal to 1 or 2, whatever, changed name from the old name, concatenate that to 2, and new name, because those variables contain old and new name respectively. And along the same lines, we are comparing genders, salary, old department to new department, and then we are building these strings dynamically there. If there is no change, then it wouldn't get into this if block and then concatenate that. So this procedure looks pretty big, but then it's pretty simple. It's mostly a copy paste. These lines you're declaring, if you look at this, these lines you're declaring variables. Here you're copying the rows from inserted table into hash temp table, and the reason why we are doing that is because if we have multiple rows, then we want to audit each employee's record. And then we are using a while loop to check there are rows in temporary table or not. And then here you are taking the first row, because you are using top one keyword. If there are multiple rows, you get the first row from the inserted table, and then along the same lines you are also getting other columns into those variables, and then using that ID retrieving the row from deleted table and then populating the old variables, and then you're building the audit string here. And finally what you need to do, you need to insert that audit string into TBL employee audit table. And if you remember, TBL employee audit table has got only two columns, ID and audit data columns. ID is an identity column whose seed is 1, increment is 1. So obviously when you insert a new row, ID value will be automatically calculated. You only have to supply the value for audit data column. So that's the reason why we are only supplying audit string into this TBL employee audit table. And then what you need to do, this is very important, delete from the temporary table, delete the record that you have just audited. Otherwise this loop will become an infinite loop. Okay, that's all. So let's alter this trigger and see if it works as expected. Press F5, command completed successfully. So the trigger is created. Now let's kind of try to update, but before that let's select the data. So let's say we want to change maybe Todd name to TODS, and look at this, Todd's record is this one, ID is equal to 4, and salary from 4,800 to, let's give him 2,000, and gender from male to, let's say, female. We can also change department ID if we want to, but I'm not going to change that. And we can say where ID is equal to 4. So when we update this, press F5. Alright, it says one row affected. Now let's select data from TBL employee table, actually employee audit and employee table. And if you look at the audit data, you should see employee with ID is equal to 4, changed name from Todd to Todd's, gender from male to female, salary from 4,800 to 2,000. Alright, so it's a simple example. I mean, it looks big, but then it's most of it is a copy paste. So the after trigger for update event makes use of both inserted and deleted tables, and obviously the inserted table contains the updated data and the deleted table contains the old data. On this slide you can find resources for ASP.NET C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.